In the unforgiving mountains of Afghanistan, where every shadow could hide death and every sound might be your last, a single gunshot changed everything for SEAL Team 6. What began as a routine reconnaissance mission became a mystery that would test their brotherhood, challenge their training, and reveal that sometimes the most dangerous enemy isn't the one you can see, but the ally you never knew existed. The shot that saved their lives came from nowhere. The sniper who fired it seemed to vanish into the mountains like smoke. But when a mysterious signal appeared on their scopes 3 days later, the SEALs realized their guardian angel might be closer than they ever imagined, and more dangerous than any enemy they'd ever faced. The morning sun painted the Afghan mountains in shades of gold and rust as Staff Sergeant Marcus Tank Rodriguez adjusted his scope for the third time in 10 minutes. Something felt wrong about this mission, though he couldn't put his finger on what exactly bothered him. The intelligence reports had been clean, the weather was perfect, and his team of 6 Navy SEALs was operating like a well-oiled machine. Yet that familiar itch between his shoulder blades, the one that had kept him alive through 4 deployments, wouldn't go away. "Eyes on the compound," whispered Lieutenant Commander Jake Ghost Morrison through the comm system, his voice barely audible even through their advanced headsets. Ghost had earned his nickname not for being quiet, but for his ability to appear and disappear from impossible situations. At 32, he was the youngest team leader in their unit's history, and Tank trusted him with his life. The target was a Taliban weapons cache hidden in what appeared to be an abandoned village nestled between 2 steep mountain ridges. According to their intelligence, the location had been empty for months, used only as a temporary storage facility. Their mission was simple: get in, document the weapons, plant tracking devices, and get out without being detected. Standard reconnaissance work that they'd done dozens of times before. Tank swept his rifle scope across the terrain below, noting the positions of his teammates. Petty Officer Bulldog Chen was positioned on the eastern ridge, his massive frame somehow invisible among the rocks. Despite weighing over 250 pounds, Bulldog moved through the mountains like a mountain goat, and his shooting skills were legendary even among the SEALs. Petty Officer First Class Doc Patterson crouched behind a boulder formation to Tank's left, medical pack secured to his back along with enough firepower to level a small building. Doc had saved more lives than any other medic in their unit, but he could also drop targets at 800 yards without breaking a sweat. Razor Williams and Tick Thompson formed the advance team, already making their way down the rocky slope toward the village. Razor got his name from his precision with a knife, while Tick earned his nickname from his obsession with timing. Everything had to happen exactly when he planned it, down to the second. "Movement in the compound." Razor's voice crackled through the comm. "2 guards, eastern building. Looks like our intelligence might have been off." Ghost's response was immediate and calm. "Hold position. Tank, what do you see?" Tank adjusted his scope, focusing on the buildings below. The village consisted of 8 stone structures arranged in a rough circle around a central courtyard. Most appeared genuinely abandoned, with crumbling walls and missing roofs. But the eastern building that Razor had identified showed signs of recent activity, a thin wisp of smoke from what might be a cooking fire, and subtle movements in the shadows of the doorway. "Confirmed. 2 targets, possibly more inside. AKA-47's visible. This isn't just a weapons cache, Ghost. Someone's living here." The silence that followed lasted exactly 7 seconds. Tank counted them. In those 7 seconds, everything changed. The first shot came from somewhere high above them, the distinctive crack of a high-powered rifle echoing off the mountain walls. Tank's training kicked in automatically, and he spun toward the sound while simultaneously scanning for the shooter's position. But instead of incoming fire, he saw something that made no sense. One of the guards below was falling, a red mist marking where his head had been a moment before. The second guard was scrambling for cover, shouting in what sounded like Pashto, but his voice was cut short by a second shot from the same mysterious location. "What the hell?" Bulldog's voice cut through the comm system. "Ghost, did one of us just fire?" "Negative," Ghost responded, his voice tense. "Tank, Bulldog, sound off. Did either of you take those shots?" "Negative," Tank replied, his scope already searching the mountainside above them for any sign of the shooter. "Shots came from somewhere above our position, maybe 800 yards northwest." "Bulldog here. Negative on the shots. But whoever made them just saved our asses." There were 4 more hostiles moving toward Razor and Tick's position. They're scrambling now. Tank could see it too. The quiet village had erupted into chaos as armed men poured from several buildings. At least 8 Taliban fighters, all heavily armed, all looking for targets. Without the mysterious sniper's intervention, Razor and Tick would have walked into a trap. All units, abort mission and move to extraction point Alpha, Ghost ordered. We're compromised and we have an unknown friendly in the area. I don't like unknowns. As the team began their tactical withdrawal, Tank kept scanning the mountain slopes for any sign of their mysterious benefactor. The angle of the shots suggested a position high above them, probably on the opposite ridge. It would have been an incredibly difficult shot, over 800 yards in mountain winds, with thermal distortion from the warming rocks. Whoever had made those shots was either extremely lucky or extremely skilled. The withdrawal took 47 minutes of careful movement through terrain that seemed designed to break ankles and expose them to enemy fire. But the mysterious sniper continued to provide overwatch, taking out 3 more Taliban fighters who tried to pursue them. Each shot was perfect, clean, quick, and devastatingly accurate. When they finally reached the extraction point, a flat area among the rocks where their helicopter could land safely, Ghost called for a team conference. "Anyone have any idea who our guardian angel might be?" he asked, removing his helmet and running a hand through sweat-soaked hair. Doc shook his head. "No other American units are supposed to be operating in this sector. I checked with command before we inserted." "Could be British SAS," Tick suggested. "They've got people in the area, and they're L-11. 5 A3 rifles could make those shots. Or maybe Afghan National Army snipers," Razor added. "Some of those guys are pretty good." Tank wasn't convinced. The shooting was too good, too precise, and the positioning was perfect for overwatch of our entire operation. Whoever it was knew we were coming. That thought hung in the air like smoke from a campfire. The idea that someone had known about their classified mission was troubling on multiple levels. Either they had a massive security leak, or someone was watching them more closely than they'd realized. The extraction helicopter arrived 20 minutes later, its twin rotors churning the mountain air into a dust storm that made conversation impossible. As they climbed aboard, Tank took one last look at the mountain ridges around them. Somewhere up there, their unknown savior was probably watching them leave. "Tank!" Ghost shouted over the helicopter noise as they lifted off. "What's your assessment of the shooter?" Tank considered his words carefully. "Professional, military trained, and whoever it was has been watching us for a while. Those weren't lucky shots, sir. That was precision work by someone who knew exactly what we were doing and when we were doing it." The flight back to their base at Bagram Airfield took 90 minutes, giving Tank plenty of time to think about what had happened. The more he analyzed the situation, the more questions arose. How had the sniper known their exact route and timing? Why had they intervened to help American forces? And most importantly, where had they gone after the firefight ended? Back at base, the debriefing took 3 hours. Intelligence officers questioned each team member separately, trying to piece together exactly what had happened. The official conclusion was that they had been assisted by unknown friendly forces, possibly Afghan National Army or coalition special operations units operating under different command structures. But Tank wasn't buying it. During his years as a SEAL, he'd worked with special operations forces from dozens of countries. He knew their capabilities, their equipment, and their operating procedures. What had happened in those mountains didn't fit any profile he knew. That night, as he lay in his bunk listening to the distant sound of helicopters and generators, Tank found himself staring at the ceiling and replaying every moment of the encounter. The precision of the shots, the perfect positioning, the uncanny timing, it all pointed to someone with intimate knowledge of SEAL operations and capabilities. 3 days later, everything changed again. Tank was cleaning his rifle in the team's equipment room when Bulldog burst through the door, his face flushed with excitement. "You're not going to believe this," Bulldog said, practically vibrating with energy. "Ghost wants everyone in the briefing room, now. We've got a situation." The briefing room was already buzzing with activity when Tank arrived. Ghost stood at the front of the room next to a large tactical display showing a topographic map of their operational area. Red markers indicated known enemy positions, while blue markers showed coalition forces. "Gentlemen," Ghost began, his voice cutting through the chatter, "we've received some interesting intelligence regarding our mysterious sniper from 3 days ago." The room fell silent. Tank leaned forward, suddenly very interested. "At 0347 this morning, one of our reconnaissance drones picked up a signal from the mountain area where we encountered the unknown shooter. Ghost clicked a remote and the display changed to show a satellite image of craggy peaks and deep valleys. The signal was brief, less than 30 seconds, but it was definitely military in nature. Another click brought up a detailed analysis of radio frequencies and signal patterns. The signal was encrypted using a format that we've never seen before. Not Russian, not Chinese, not any known Taliban communication protocol. But here's the interesting part. Embedded in the encrypted data was a series of coordinates. Tank felt his pulse quicken as Ghost continued. The coordinates point to a location approximately 12 kilometers from where we were extracted. Satellite imagery shows what appears to be a natural cave system in an area that our maps list as uninhabitable and uninhabited. Doc raised his hand. Sir, could this be some kind of trap? The Taliban are known for using captured equipment and communication methods. That was my first thought, Ghost replied, but intelligence analysis suggests otherwise. The encryption method is too sophisticated for anything the Taliban has access to, and the timing of the signal, coming exactly 3 days after our encounter, seems too coincidental to ignore. Tick spoke up from the back of the room. What's the mission, sir? Are we going to investigate? Ghost's expression grew serious. Command is putting together a reconnaissance mission to investigate the signal source. Small team, minimal equipment, in and out quickly. We're going to find out who our guardian angel is. Tank raised his hand.
Sir, request permission to volunteer for the mission.
Already assumed you'd want in, Tank. In fact, I'm specifically requesting this team for the operation.
We know the terrain, we know the tactical situation, and frankly, we're the ones who owe this unknown person a debt of gratitude. The mission briefing took another hour, covering everything from weather conditions to emergency extraction procedures. They would insert at dawn, make their way to the coordinates provided by the mysterious signal, conduct surveillance, and report back. Simple reconnaissance. No engagement unless absolutely necessary. But as Tank studied the satellite images of their target area, he couldn't shake the feeling that nothing about this mission would be simple. The terrain was brutally difficult. Steep ridges, narrow valleys, and weather that could change from clear skies to blizzard conditions in minutes. It was the kind of place where people went to disappear, either by choice or by accident. One more thing, Ghost added, as the briefing wound down. Intelligence has a theory about our mysterious sniper that I want everyone to consider. Whether that person was friend or enemy, American or foreign, sane or dangerous, remained to be discovered. But Tank was certain of one thing. Their next encounter with the mysterious mountain sniper would change everything they thought they knew about their war, their mission, and possibly themselves. The pre-dawn air cut through Tank's gear like ice water as the team made their final equipment checks. The helicopter insertion had gone smoothly, depositing them on a rocky plateau 6 kilometers from their target coordinates. Now, as the sky began to lighten with the first hints of sunrise, they faced a treacherous journey through terrain that looked more like the surface of an alien planet than anything on Earth. Ghost studied his GPS unit one final time before tucking it into his vest pocket. Weather report says we have maybe 6 hours before the afternoon storms roll in. After that, visibility drops to near zero, and the temperature can drop 40 degrees in an hour. Tank shouldered his pack, feeling the familiar weight of ammunition, water, and emergency medical supplies. For this mission, they'd stripped down to essential gear only, no heavy weapons, minimal communication equipment, and food for just 24 hours. Speed and stealth were their primary objectives. Movement order is razor on point, then me, Doc, Tank, Bulldog, and Tick bringing up the rear, Ghost announced. We maintain 50-meter intervals and complete radio silence unless someone spots immediate danger. Our mystery sniper proved they can hear our communications, so we assume they're listening to everything we say. The first hour of movement was deceptively easy. The terrain consisted mainly of loose rock and scrub vegetation, with occasional patches of snow in the shadows between boulders. Razor set a steady pace, picking routes that offered maximum concealment, while minimizing the risk of twisted ankles or equipment damage. Tank found himself constantly scanning the ridgelines above them, searching for any sign of observation or potential threats. The mountains seemed empty and lifeless, but his instincts told him otherwise. Somewhere among those peaks and valleys, their guardian angel was watching, waiting, probably tracking their progress with equipment far more sophisticated than anything they carried. As they climbed higher, the terrain became increasingly hostile. Loose rock gave way to steep cliff faces and narrow ledges that required careful foot placement and steady nerves. The air grew thinner, making each breath a conscious effort, and the temperature dropped steadily despite the rising sun. During their second rest break, Doc pointed out something that made Tank's blood run cold. Fresh boot prints in a patch of soft earth, barely visible, but unmistakably human. The prints were large, probably size 11 or 12, and showed the distinctive tread pattern of military-issued hiking boots. Ghost examined the tracks carefully, noting their direction and apparent age. Maybe 12 hours old, he whispered, his voice so low that Tank had to lean in close to hear him. Heading northeast, toward our target coordinates. The implications were obvious and troubling. Someone had walked this exact route less than a day before them. Someone with military equipment and knowledge of their planned approach. Either their mysterious sniper was expecting them, or they were walking into a trap. 3 hours into their climb, they reached a natural observation point that offered a clear view of their destination. Tank pulled out his spotting scope and focused on the coordinates provided by the mysterious radio signal. What he saw made him question everything they thought they knew about their situation. The cave system was larger and more complex than satellite images had suggested. Multiple openings dotted the cliff face at different elevations, connected by what appeared to be man-made paths carved into the rock. Most striking was a series of camouflaged positions that would be invisible to satellite surveillance, but were clearly visible from their current vantage point. "Ghost, you need to see this," Tank whispered, passing over the spotting scope. Ghost spent several minutes studying the target area, his expression growing more troubled with each passing second. "Those are professional defensive positions," he finally said. "Overlapping fields of fire, natural choke points, concealed observation posts. Whoever set this up knows military tactics." Doc took his turn with the scope, focusing on different aspects of the cave complex. "I'm seeing solar panels, communication antennas, and what might be a water collection system. This isn't a temporary hide site. Someone's been living here for months, maybe years." The team spent another hour observing their target, noting patterns of activity and identifying potential approach routes. What they discovered painted a picture of someone with extensive military training, unlimited patience, and access to equipment that should have been impossible to obtain in such a remote location. "There," Bulldog whispered, pointing toward one of the higher cave entrances. "Movement in the shadows. Someone's home." Tank swung his scope toward the indicated position and caught a brief glimpse of a figure moving between concealed positions. Tall, lean, dressed in military-style clothing that blended perfectly with the rocky environment. The person moved with the fluid grace of someone comfortable in their surroundings, checking various positions in a pattern that suggested routine security sweeps. "Definitely military-trained," Tank reported. "The way he moves, the systematic approach to security, that's not amateur hour." Ghost made a decision that would haunt Tank for months afterward. "We're going in. Whatever's going on here, we need answers. But we go slow, we go careful, and at the first sign of trouble, we extract immediately." The descent toward the cave complex took 2 more hours of careful movement through terrain that seemed designed to kill anyone foolish enough to attempt it. Loose rock, hidden crevices, and sudden drop-offs made every step a calculated risk. But gradually, they worked their way closer to their mysterious target. At 400 yards from the cave entrances, Ghost called a halt. They had reached the point where further advance would be impossible without being detected by anyone with basic security procedures. It was time to make contact, one way or another. "Unknown person in the cave complex," Ghost called out, his voice echoing off the surrounding rocks. "This is Lieutenant Commander Morrison, United States Navy. We know you're there, and we know you helped us 3 days ago. We just want to talk." The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. Tank kept his rifle ready but pointed away from the caves, hoping their intentions would be interpreted as peaceful. Around him, his teammates maintained similar positions, alert but not immediately threatening. The response, when it came, was not what any of them expected. "Ghost, that you?" The voice that drifted down from the caves was unmistakably American, with a slight southern accent that sounded familiar. "Well, I'll be damned. Marcus still on your team? And that big Chinese kid? What was his name? Chen?" Tank felt the world shift beneath his feet. The voice was older, rougher than he remembered, but unmistakable. He found himself standing before he realized he was moving, staring up at the cave complex with a mixture of shock and disbelief. "Holy shit," Bulldog whispered, voicing what they were all thinking. "No way. No fucking way." A figure emerged from one of the concealed positions, moving with careful deliberation down a path that had been invisible from their observation point. As he drew closer, details became clear that confirmed their impossible suspicions. The man approaching them was tall and lean, with sun-weathered skin and hair that had gone prematurely grey. He carried a high-end sniper rifle with casual familiarity and wore a mixture of military gear and local clothing. But most importantly, he wore a faded tattoo on his left forearm, a distinctive design that Tank recognized immediately. "Jesus Christ," Doc breathed. "Reaper? Danny Reaper Sullivan?" The man, now known to be Sullivan, stopped about 50 yards away, well within conversation distance, but far enough to react to any sudden movements. His smile was the same one Tank remembered from a dozen missions, though it was now framed by lines of exhaustion and something that might have been madness. "Hello, boys," Sullivan said, his voice carrying clearly in the thin mountain air. "Been a while since I've had visitors, especially ones wearing Navy uniforms." Tank's mind raced as he processed the implications of what he was seeing. Danny Reaper Sullivan had been declared missing in action 18 months ago during a classified operation in the northern provinces. His helicopter had been shot down during extraction, and despite extensive search efforts, no trace of him or his team had ever been found. The military had eventually declared him dead, and Tank had attended his memorial service at Dam Neck, but here he was, very much alive, apparently thriving in one of the most hostile environments on Earth. Ghost recovered first, his training overriding his shock.
"Danny, what the hell are you doing out here? Command declared you KIA over a year ago."
"Do you have any idea how many people have been looking for you?" Sullivan's expression darkened slightly. "Yeah, well, sometimes it's better to stay lost, especially when the people looking for you might not have your best interests at heart." The cryptic response hung in the air like a challenge. Tank found himself studying his former teammate more carefully, noting changes that went beyond the obvious effects of surviving alone in the mountains. Sullivan's eyes held a wariness that hadn't been there before, and he maintained a defensive posture that suggested he considered even his former brothers potentially dangerous. "Danny," Tank said, stepping forward slightly, "what happened to your team? Where are Peterson and Kowalski? Are they dead?" Sullivan replied flatly, "Both of them. Killed during the helicopter crash that was supposed to kill me too." The bitterness in his voice was unmistakable, and Tank began to understand that whatever had happened to Sullivan involved more than just a simple helicopter crash.
"Supposed to kill you?" Ghost asked carefully. "Danny, what are you talking about?" Sullivan was quiet for a long moment, studying each of their faces as if trying to determine how much he could trust them. When he finally spoke, his words carried the weight of 18 months of isolation and growing paranoia. "You boys ever wonder why that Taliban weapons cache turned out to be occupied? Why your intelligence was so far off base, or how those fighters knew exactly when and where you'd be approaching?" Tank felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that someone back at command has been feeding information to the wrong people. Someone with access to classified mission details, operational schedules, and team assignments. Someone who's been setting up American Special Operations teams for ambushes and capture." The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. The idea that someone within their own command structure might be working with enemy forces was almost too terrible to contemplate, but it would explain several recent operational failures that had puzzled intelligence analysts. "That's a serious allegation, Danny," Ghost said carefully. "Do you have any proof?" Sullivan's laugh was harsh and bitter. "Proof? Brother, I've been watching classified operations get compromised for over a year. I've seen SEAL teams, Ranger units, and Delta squads walk into perfectly positioned ambushes based on intelligence that could only have come from inside our own command structure." He gestured toward the valley where they had encountered him 3 days earlier. "That weapons cache you were sent to investigate? It was bait. Pure and simple. Someone wanted your team captured or killed, and they used false intelligence to put you exactly where the Taliban was waiting." Doc spoke up for the first time since Sullivan's identity had been confirmed. "If that's true, why did you help us? Why risk exposing yourself?" "Because you're my brothers. Because I've seen too many good soldiers die because of someone else's betrayal. And because I've been waiting for the right opportunity to get word back to people I trust." Tank found himself believing Sullivan's story, despite its implications. Too many recent operations had gone wrong in ways that suggested inside knowledge of American capabilities and intentions. But accepting Sullivan's allegations meant accepting that someone they trusted, someone with access to the highest levels of military intelligence, was actively working to get them killed. "What do you need from us?" Tank asked. Sullivan smiled for the first time since revealing his identity, and Tank caught a glimpse of the man he had once served alongside. "I need you to get a message to Admiral Patterson, and only Admiral Patterson. Tell him that Operation Broken Chain is compromised at the source level. Tell him that the November Phoenix incident was not a coincidence. He'll understand what that means." Ghost nodded slowly. "What about you? Are you coming back with us?" "Can't do that, brother. Not yet. I'm safer out here than I would be back at base. At least until we know who's been passing information." But I'll keep watching, keep protecting our people when I can. The conversation was interrupted by the distant sound of helicopter rotors echoing off the mountain peaks. All 6 SEALs instinctively took cover, but Sullivan remained standing, apparently unconcerned by the approaching aircraft. "That's not one of ours," he said calmly. "Soviet-era Mi-8, probably Taliban or other unfriendlies. They've been using this area for drug running and weapon smuggling. Usually show up about this time of day." Tank watched through his scope as the helicopter appeared over a distant ridge, flying low and fast through the valley system. It was indeed an older Russian design, painted in drab colors that would blend with the landscape from above. "How often do they come through?" Ghost asked. 3, maybe 4 times a week. Always the same route, always the same time of day. They're running something big. Drugs, weapons, maybe even people. I've been tracking their movements for months." As they watched, the helicopter disappeared behind another ridge, the sound of its rotors gradually fading into the distance. But its appearance had reminded them all of their precarious position in hostile territory. "We need to think about extraction," Ghost said reluctantly. "Our window for pickup is closing, and I don't want to risk the bird flying into whatever operation those guys are running." Sullivan nodded, understanding. "There's a safe extraction point about 2 clicks north of here. Natural landing zone, good cover, and far enough from regular enemy movement patterns to be relatively secure." As they prepared to leave, Sullivan grabbed Tank's arm. "Marcus, I need you to promise me something. When you deliver my message to Admiral Patterson, make sure he understands that this goes all the way to the top. Whoever's been compromising operations has access to information that only a handful of people should know." Tank nodded grimly. "What about communication? How do we stay in contact with you?" "You don't. At least not through normal channels. But I'll be watching. When things get dangerous for SEAL operations in this sector, I'll be there." Sullivan paused, looking each of them in the eye. "And when you figure out who's been selling us out, I'll be ready to help settle that debt." The journey to the extraction point took 45 minutes, through terrain that seemed designed to test every piece of equipment they carried. But Sullivan proved to be an invaluable guide, leading them through paths that were invisible to satellite surveillance and known only to someone who had spent months learning every rock and crevice of the surrounding mountains. As they waited for their extraction helicopter, Tank found himself studying Sullivan's improvised equipment and survival setup. The man had clearly adapted to mountain survival with remarkable skill, but the cost of his isolation was evident in his manner and speech patterns. 18 months alone in some of the world's most hostile terrain had changed him in ways that might never fully heal. "Danny," Tank said quietly as the sound of approaching rotors announced their ride home, "when this is over, when we've figured out what's been happening, you're coming home. That's not a request." Sullivan's smile was sad and tired. "Brother, I'm not sure I know what home looks like anymore, but when the time comes, when it's safe, maybe we can find out together." The extraction helicopter appeared over the ridge exactly on schedule. Its crew clearly relieved to find the SEAL team safe and ready for pickup. As they prepared to board, Sullivan melted back into the landscape with the same ghost-like ability that had made him legendary among Special Operations Forces. But as their helicopter lifted off and began the flight back to base, Tank caught one final glimpse of movement among the rocks below, a lone figure watching their departure, standing guard over secrets that could reshape their understanding of the war they were fighting. The return flight gave them time to process what they had discovered, but also raised new questions that were even more troubling than the answers they had found. If Sullivan's allegations were true, then they were fighting 2 wars simultaneously, one against the recognized enemy, and another against betrayers within their own ranks. And somewhere in the mountains behind them, a dead man continued his solitary watch, protecting brothers who might never know how close they had come to walking into their own graves. Admiral James Patterson's office at Naval Special Warfare Command was a testament to 3 decades of military service, its walls lined with commendations, unit patches, and photographs of operations that officially never happened. When Tank and Ghost were ushered into the secure conference room adjacent to the Admiral's office, they found themselves facing not just Patterson, but also a stern-faced woman in civilian clothes who introduced herself only as Special Agent Torres from Naval Criminal Investigative Service. "Gentlemen," Admiral Patterson began without preamble, "your report about encountering Petty Officer Sullivan has created quite a stir up the chain of command. Before we proceed, I need to know, are you absolutely certain it was Sullivan you encountered?" Ghost answered without hesitation.
Positive identification, sir.
facial recognition, voice recognition, and specific knowledge that only Sullivan would possess. He also mentioned Operation Broken Chain and something called the November Phoenix incident. The change in Admiral Patterson's expression was immediate and dramatic. His face went pale, and he exchanged a meaningful look with Agent Torres before continuing. "Gentlemen, what I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels. Operation Broken Chain was a covert intelligence program designed to identify security breaches within Special Operations Command structures. The November Phoenix incident refers to the deliberate sacrifice of a SEAL team 18 months ago to test whether classified operational intelligence was being leaked to enemy forces." Tank felt the bottom drop out of his stomach. "Sir, are you saying that Sullivan's team was deliberately sent into a trap?" "Not exactly," Agent Torres interjected. "The operation was designed to appear routine while actually serving as a test of information security. Sullivan's team was given false extraction coordinates to see if enemy forces would be waiting at the correct location. Unfortunately, the helicopter was shut down before the test could be completed." "But Sullivan survived," Ghost pointed out. "According to all official records, Sullivan died in that crash along with the rest of his team." Admiral Patterson replied grimly, "The fact that he's been alive and operating independently for 18 months suggests that our security concerns were well-founded." Agent Torres opened a thick folder and spread several photographs across the conference table. "These are surveillance photos taken from various bases and facilities over the past 2 years. Notice anything unusual?" Tank studied the images carefully. They showed personnel in military uniforms moving through different locations, but nothing immediately stood out as suspicious. Then Ghost pointed to something that made Tank's blood run cold. "This man appears in photos from at least 4 different facilities," Ghost said, indicating a figure in the background of several images. "Different uniforms, different access credentials, but definitely the same person." "Correct," Torres confirmed. "Colonel Marcus Webb, currently assigned to Joint Special Operations Command Intelligence Division. For the past 2 years, Colonel Webb has had unrestricted access to operational planning for virtually every special operations mission conducted in Afghanistan." Admiral Patterson leaned forward, his expression grave. 3 hours ago, based on information provided in your report, NCIS agents conducted a search of Colonel Webb's personal quarters and discovered encrypted communication equipment, detailed maps of recent SEAL operations, and over $2 million in offshore bank accounts."
Tank struggled to process the implications.
"Sir, are you telling us that Colonel Webb has been selling operational intelligence to the Taliban?" "Not just selling it," Torres replied. "Webb has been actively coordinating with enemy forces to maximize American casualties. The weapons cache your team was sent to investigate was part of an elaborate trap designed to capture or kill your entire unit." The revelation hit Tank like a physical blow. He had served under Webb's command during his first deployment, respected the man's tactical knowledge and leadership abilities. The idea that someone they had trusted with their lives was actively working to get them killed was almost incomprehensible. "Where is Webb now?" Ghost asked. "Missing," Admiral Patterson admitted. "When NCIS agents arrived at his quarters this morning, they found evidence that he had departed hastily sometime during the night. We believe he may have been tipped off about the investigation." Agent Torres added another photograph to the collection on the table. This one showed Colonel Webb in civilian clothes, apparently taken at an airport or travel terminal. "This image was captured by security cameras at Bagram Airfield approximately 6 hours ago. Webb boarded a civilian contract flight to Dubai using false identification documents. From there, he could disappear into any number of countries that don't have extradition treaties with the United States." Tank found himself thinking about Sullivan. Alone in the mountains, continuing his solitary watch over operations that Webb had been systematically compromising. "Admiral, what about Sullivan? He's been protecting our people while we've been unknowingly taking orders from a traitor. That brings us to our next problem," Patterson replied. "Sullivan has been officially dead for 18 months. Bringing him back into active status would require explanations that could compromise ongoing investigations into other potential security breaches." "Sir, with respect, Sullivan has been risking his life to protect American forces," Ghost protested. "He deserves better than being left out there indefinitely." Torres spoke up. "There may be a solution. NCIS is prepared to offer Sullivan a position as a civilian contractor, specializing in counterintelligence operations in remote areas. He would maintain his current cover identity while providing us with intelligence about enemy operations and potential security risks." Tank wasn't entirely satisfied with that arrangement, but he understood the practical considerations involved. Sullivan had found a way to be effective in his current situation, and bringing him back into official channels might actually reduce his ability to help. "What about Webb?" Tank asked. "Are we just going to let him escape?" Admiral Patterson's smile was cold and predatory. Colonel Webb made a serious mistake when he decided to betray his country and his brothers in arms. While he may have escaped immediate arrest, he's now a fugitive with very limited options and resources. More importantly, he's no longer in a position to compromise ongoing operations. Torres added, "NCIS is coordinating with international law enforcement agencies to track Webb's movements. He may have escaped for now, but men like him tend to make mistakes when they're under pressure." The debriefing continued for another hour, covering everything from operational security improvements to new procedures for vetting personnel with access to classified information. But throughout the discussion, Tank found his thoughts returning to Sullivan, maintaining his lonely vigil in the Afghan mountains. 2 weeks later, Tank found himself back in the same mountain region, leading a new reconnaissance mission with enhanced security protocols. As they approached their target area, he couldn't help scanning the surrounding ridges for any sign of their guardian angel. The mission proceeded smoothly, with no unexpected complications or enemy contact. But as they prepared for extraction, Tank noticed something that made him smile despite the dangerous circumstances. A brief glint of light from a distant ridge, lasting exactly 3 seconds, the traditional sniper's signal for "mission successful, all clear." Somewhere in those mountains, Sullivan was still watching, still protecting his brothers, still honoring the brotherhood that transcended official records and military paperwork. That night, back at base, Tank received an encrypted message through channels that were supposedly impossible for anyone without the highest security clearances to access. The message was brief and unsigned. "Package delivered to Dubai. Special handling required. A friend in high places." Tank deleted the message immediately, but its meaning was clear. Colonel Webb's escape had been shorter than anyone expected. And somewhere in the intelligence community, people were ensuring that his betrayal of American forces would not go unpunished. 3 months later, international news reports mentioned the discovery of an American citizen's body in a remote area of Pakistan, apparently killed during a robbery attempt. The victim was identified as Marcus Webb, described as a businessman who had been traveling in the region. The Pakistani authorities expressed regret over the incident, but noted that the remote area where the body was found was known for criminal activity. Tank read the news report with mixed emotions. Justice had been served, but it had come through unofficial channels that raised their own troubling questions about accountability and oversight. 6 months after their encounter with Sullivan, Tank's team received new orders for a mission in the same mountain region where they had first met their mysterious guardian. As they prepared for deployment, Tank wondered if they would encounter Sullivan again, and what new revelations might await them in those dangerous peaks. The helicopter insertion went smoothly, depositing them in familiar terrain that looked unchanged despite the passage of time. But as they began their approach to the target area, Tank noticed something that hadn't been there before. A small pile of rocks arranged in a specific pattern that he recognized as a tactical marker. Following the direction indicated by the marker led them to a concealed cache containing updated intelligence about enemy movements in the area, along with a brief handwritten note. "Brothers, Webb is no longer a concern. New players in the area, Chinese intelligence operatives working with local Taliban commanders. Exercise extreme caution. Watch for electronic surveillance equipment in buildings marked with blue chalk. Extraction point Charlie has been compromised. Use Delta instead. Stay safe. DS." Tank shared the intelligence with his team, and they modified their mission plan accordingly. The information proved accurate, allowing them to avoid several potential ambushes and complete their objectives without incident. As they made their way to Extraction Point Delta, Tank caught sight of a lone figure on a distant ridge, barely visible against the rocky landscape. The figure raised one hand in a brief salute, before disappearing back into the terrain, leaving no trace of his presence. During the helicopter ride back to base, Tank reflected on the strange course of events that had led them from a simple reconnaissance mission to uncovering betrayal at the highest levels of command. Sullivan's sacrifice, his willingness to remain officially dead while continuing to protect his brothers, represented the finest traditions of military service. But more than that, Sullivan's story demonstrated the unbreakable bonds that existed between warriors who had fought together, faced death together, and refused to abandon each other even when official channels failed them. Back at base, Tank filed his standard mission report, noting the successful completion of all objectives and the absence of enemy contact. But in a separate, highly classified addendum, available only to Admiral Patterson and Agent Torres, He included details about the intelligence provided by their unofficial guardian.
2 days later, Chinese intelligence operatives were arrested in Kabul based on information that intelligence officers claimed came from highly classified sources. The operation was considered a significant success for American counterintelligence efforts in the region. Tank never saw Sullivan again, though he continued to receive occasional intelligence updates through the same untraceable channels.
Each message was brief, professional, and invariably accurate. More importantly, each message represented a brother who had chosen duty and sacrifice over personal safety and official recognition.
Years later, after Tank had completed his military service and returned to civilian life, he sometimes found himself thinking about the mountains of Afghanistan and the lone guardian who might still be watching over American forces operating in that dangerous region.
The official records would never acknowledge Sullivan's continued service, and his sacrifice would remain known only to a small group of people who understood the true meaning of brotherhood. But in the end, Tank realized that was exactly how Sullivan would have wanted it.
Some heroes wore medals and received public recognition for their service. Others operated in shadows, asking for nothing except the knowledge that their brothers would come home safely. In the brutal calculus of war, both types of heroism were necessary. But Tank had learned that sometimes the most important battles were fought by people whose names would never appear in history books, whose sacrifices would never be officially acknowledged, and whose only reward was the satisfaction of duty fulfilled and brothers protected. The mountains of Afghanistan had taught Tank many lessons about courage, loyalty, and sacrifice. But perhaps the most important lesson was that the bonds forged between warriors transcended official recognition, military rank, and even life and death itself.
Somewhere in those mountains, a guardian continued his watch, protecting brothers he might never see again, fighting a war that officially ended years ago, honoring a brotherhood that would last forever. And that, Tank realized, was exactly as it should be.